Hello, how are you all? I hope you're well. We are going to just do a little preliminary, I think, just establishing of something very important to the Christian story, and that is the first Christians, and that many of the first Christians and martyrs indeed happen to be members of the Flavian court. There are 4 or 5 characters that are instrumental in early Christianity. That is Titus Flavius Clemens, or Clement of Rome, Titus Flavius Clemens. There is also Domitilla. She was one of the first, Christian saints, St. Domitilla. There are catacombs of Domitilla in Rome, and these are also the places where we find the first Christian symbols. These are not crosses, but they're anchors and fish or dolphins. This is also the very symbol that Titus used on lots of the coins that he minted during his 2-year reign in the 80s. I think it was about the 80s. There's a Berenice, who was Titus's kind of concubine, mistress. 10 years his senior. But they had a fling together, and St. Berenice again, or Veronica, St. Veronica appears in early Christianity. We have Epaphroditus, who is linked to Clement, and both of these people are martyred in early Christianity, but they're also martyred by the Emperor Domitian, who is Titus's brother. And it's interesting, actually, if you see there's a Roman show on at the moment which shows you something in fictional form, like some of the antipathy these two brothers had for one another. There was something like a 13-year age difference, Titus being the older brother. And Domitian is a little bit of a shit in this show. What's it called? Those who are about to die, I think it's called. But you'll see this relationship, and Domitian clearly didn't like his brother very much, which shows you why there's this kind of lacuna in Christianity in the 2nd century, and this falling away of what looks like very primitive Christianity. So we're just going to go through, only going to be a 20-minute video, guys, but what I want to do is establish that there's a relationship between some of the earliest Christians, the Herod Agrippa family as well, and the Flavian family, and that there are resonances and these little connections and dots we see in the earliest times between this symbolism, these names, these titles, and the family that as I've already recalled, have a clear relationship to the stories or the ministries, the evangelions, the good news in Roman of military victory. And Jesus' ministry can also mean a good news of military victory. And we all know now who was hunting for men on the Sea of Galilee, right? Not Jesus, but Titus. Yes. So we're going to see these connections. I'm going to read from Creating Christ, How Roman Emperors Invented Christianity. The book is largely, I think, fairly consistent. Shots have been made to try and shoot some of these claims down, but I don't think they're particularly valid, and only at times can some of this information be at least contextualized as actually fairly open to interpretation. Maybe these guys there could be references over here, or there could be coincidences of names, but when we think about it, this pretty well historically validated by primary evidence. Anyway, we're talking about the Flavians. First, among the close relatives of the Flavian emperors, we must take note of his Flavian's nephew and Titus's cousin, Vespasian's nephew and Titus's cousin, a man named Titus Flavius Clemens. As we've already seen, his name was shared by the later Titus Flavius Clemens, the church father known today as St. Clement of Alexandria, who lived in the 3rd century. So we have three now: St. Clement of Rome, we have Titus Flavius Clemens, same name, and then also Clement of Alexandria. And we're going to see this guy lived in the 200s, Clement of Alexandria. He may well have been a relative of the same man who has two names, one in Christianity and one in Rome, him being related to Titus. So the later Clemens suggested that both anchors and dolphins be adopted as Christian symbols a century after the death of this possible ancestor. This earlier Titus Flavius Clemens, who lived during the imperial rule of his Flavian relatives, was known as St. Clement of Rome, one of the first popes. According to church tradition, one of the first popes, either the 3rd or 4th, depending on the ancient lists used. So Linus is between Peter and this Clement in one of the traditions. Was the first century Clement of Rome. However, Tertullian names him as the successor of St. Peter himself, and St. Jerome reports a tradition that Clement was the second after the Apostle Peter, so Linus being in between. So how could such a close relative of the Flavian emperor be second or third, or fourth, or any such high-ranking figure in early Christianity? Interesting question. Cassius Dio says this: 3rd century Roman historian, Domitian slew among many others Flavius Clemens, the consul, although he was a cousin and had two. I'm sorry about this, for fuck's sake. Chill. I've had lots of coffee this morning. Domitian slew along with many others Flavius Clemens, the consul, although he was a cousin and had to wife Flavia Domitilla, who was also a relative of the emperors. The charge brought against them both was that of atheism, a charge on which many others who drifted into Jewish ways were condemned. Some of these were put to death, and the rest were at least deprived of their property. Domitilla was banished to Pandateria. Apologies. So we see, according to Dio here, Flavius Clemens and these Domitilla as well went into Jewish ways, fell into Jewish ways. What does that mean? If Christianity is a kind of offshoot of a messianic sect, Judaism as a messianic sect, could that mean to these primitive, that this primitive religion was actually likened to these Jewish ways, and this atheism, which is important, is not necessarily a godlessness. It meant, as far as the Romans were concerned, going into other religions, not following the pagan Roman religious kind of system. Cassius Dio tells us that Titus Flavius Clemens was a consul and great nephew of Vespasian himself. Cassius Dio also reports that that this Clemens was executed by his cousin, the Emperor Domitian, in 95 CE. So this puts it exactly where we need it to be if we want to refer to the other Titus Flavius Clemens, or Clement of Rome, one of the earliest Christians, and someone who doesn't know the Christian story, who doesn't know the history of the Gospels at all in any of his letters. He can't quote Jesus. He doesn't know about the miracles. He doesn't know about the family. He knows certain, like Cephas, he references, but according to me, that could just mean earlier kind of Gnostic Christians that are linked to Paul. And Paul comes up here Since the Clement executed by Domitian was an uncircumcised Roman and unlikely to have ever adopted a kosher diet, it is far easier to think of him as a kind of Christian than a Judaizer. Okay, so this is an offshoot now. It's becoming an offshoot. If this is right, if James Valiant here is right, Creating Christ, good book. If what our theory implies is correct, then the Flavians were intimately involved with the creation of Christianity. Then the timing of Clement's involvement would perfectly coincide with Pliny the Younger's claim that Christianity was in vogue around 20 years prior to his letter to Trajan. That is, at the very middle of the Flavian era when Clemens must have been flourishing. Clemens' status as a Christian leader would also support Pliny's description of Christians as reaching across all classes of Romans. Moreover, since Clemens' near relatives, Vespasian and Titus, claimed to be Jewish messiahs, Clemens no doubt acknowledged that making him potentially messianic in his Jewish ways. A messianic Christian. The 2nd century historian Suetonius confirms the execution of Titus Flavius Clemens, but does not specifically specify a charge, saying only that it was a trivial pretext. So Domitian goes after these people, we can assume, because they've adopted Jewish ways and their atheism. But this other factor here, in that potentially Clement was actually gaining traction with Christians, new Christians. And there's the reference here to Pliny the Younger and him saying, I'm going to pull out the quote in subsequent videos here because it's very interesting. He, obviously Christianity at the time Pliny is writing is fairly nascent. He doesn't know them. Trajan doesn't really understand who these people are. But in the 90s, this is probably the date when we begin to see the first Christians, this first anointed Savior Messiah, this entity in Rome. It comports with a lot of the other information about Christianity. If you just push it forward a little bit and you take Paul's writings, whoever Paul was, this composite character, and remember this is so important as well, he says he's writing, his editor, his publisher of his letters is a guy called Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus is Titus's secretary of letters. Our Epaphroditus is executed by Domitian along with Clement of Rome. What? So there's a lot of information here that we can glean. It gets pretty interesting. Now Eusebius, the church historian who wrote in the early 4th century, also mentions Clement as a 1st century pope. Usefully, he adds to the picture that a niece of the consul Flavius Clemens, named Flavia Domitilla, was banished to Pontus because of her testimony to Christ. Since this is the same name as Titus Flavius Clemens' own banished wife, and since the post-Domitian period was characterized by tolerance of Christians, this is true, it is probable that Eusebius is confused here with not intentionally throwing us off the track. Were there really two ladies of that family named Flavia Domitilla, both banished for their quasi-Jewish religious beliefs at around the same time, or just one? If they are the same, then Flavia Domitilla was the wife of the consul Clemens, not his niece. If she was a niece of the emperor Titus and Domitian, she was the granddaughter of Emperor Vespasian, Titus's father, and she hadn't just adopted Jewish ways. She was a Christian, according to Eusebius. With all of the confusion surrounding the identification of the 1st century Jewish and Christian sectarians, errors of this sort are familiar. So there's not much difficulty here in establishing, I think, what is going on. Remember, the names are all consistent. And it's this references here to Flavius, to Flavian, the Flavian family, and Domitian finding it very annoying that stuff is going on, this Judaizing that's going on. Yeah, we can draw some dots. In all likelihood, these two Flavia Domitilas, both banished for either drifting into Jewish ways or making a testimony for Christ, are in fact the same person. Revealingly, the Christian historian Eusebius directly follows his account of Domitila's banishment from Domitian, with Domitian ordering the execution of all the relatives of Christ's own family and all those of King David's royal line, all potential messianic claimants to his throne. If we may safely identify the two Flavia Domitilas as one person, then the first century Pope St. Clement is our Titus Flavius Clement, her husband, after his cousin Titus's death. Clemens was probably the highest ranking Christian of the time. So we can see here there might be a power grab going on. And it's interesting that, I mean, the power of Jews in Rome at the time, these called Jews, was actually quite significant. There were, instigations and fights, and Jews were being kicked out of Rome. These Jews, as far as the Romans are concerned, they were called Jews, but they might have been these kind of messianic claimants. And if this was a conspiracy as such by Titus to try and claim this messianic title of the new savior, yeah, we can see why Domitian would not particularly like that, especially if he had a problem with his brother. It's just really interesting. I don't want to go on too much, but what I'll do is I'll just put a bookmark in this and we'll come back to it. But there's a lot going on, and I think St. Clement of Alexandria and Clement, the two other things very quickly. The St. Clement of Rome is executed along with Epaphroditus. We have that, but he's also executed by being tied to an anchor. I think that was quite important. And then the Clement of Alexandria suggests in his works that the anchor and the fish should be used as a Christian symbol. And this Clement of Alexandria might well have been a relative of Clement of Rome, who is Titus Flavius Clemens. So we have Berenice as well to look at. Berenice, who was Titus's concubine, mistress for a few years. She's in that Roman TV show. Really interesting stuff, guys. So I'm going to be putting together more of this, and lots of Paul's friends and so on, lots of the people he's with actually have a relationship to this family as well. We have to take this seriously. Remember, Paul spent a lot of time in Rome. This composite carrier, Paul, spent a lot of time in Rome. Just going to leave that there. We have, very quickly, I'm just looking at this. Again, the catacombs of St. Domitilla actually specifically reference Sepulchrum Flaviorum. So the idea is that she's obviously buried in the catacombs, St. Domitilla, but we also see the first Christian symbol of exactly the same symbol, the first known Christian symbol appearing in exactly the same catacomb, and it's just a stylized anchor with fish. And there are some orders of magnitudes of this fish symbolism that crop up, and the relationship here is interesting. They're not always exactly the same symbol, but they're very close, so they're stylized somewhat, but it's really interesting, people. So yeah, we need to leave that there. Anyway, peace out. I'm going to Margate for the weekend, but like and subscribe if you're into this. But hopefully I'll be able to put out a video every day. Here's your one for today. I hope you enjoy it. We're building we're building a big tapestry of information. We're going to keep going. We'll not stop. And soon the content is going to get a lot better and more organized and more precise, and there'll be quotes, and I know this stuff quite well, so hopefully. So yeah, ciao for now. Bye.